pleasure to welcome us back for our next panel of four, starting with Miko Maekawa, Senior Research Fellow at the Ocean Policy Research Institute of the Sasakawa Peace Foundation. Prior to joining SPF, Miko worked at several organizations, including the United Nations Development Program, University of Tokyo, as an assistant professor with the Wisdom of Water corporate sponsored research program, and at the Graduate School of Human Sciences at Osaka University as a lecturer. During her assignment at UNDP, Ms. Maekawa has managed a wide range of environmental projects on climate change mitigation, biodiversity conservation, and environmental mainstreaming. And we're here with her group, highly skilled migrant workers as a vulnerability of small island developing states during the COVID-19 pandemic. Please, over to you.
Well, thank you so much for the kind introduction. Is the microphone okay?
Okay, right. Thanks so much. Well, good afternoon. I hope you all had nice lunch. Yeah, thank you so much for this wonderful opportunity. And I also would like to thank our partners for making this occasion happen. Thank you so much. So the title of my presentation is this, as Alex has mentioned just now, highly skilled migrant workers as a vulnerability of small island developing states during the COVID-19 pandemic. We've been talking about Pacific countries being country of origin migrating to United States and other parts of the world. But in fact, Pacific Island countries, in particular Micronesian countries, have been accepting, welcoming foreign migrants as well. So we will be focusing on this aspect. And during the COVID period, we couldn't really travel. So we kind of had to be very creative in how to pursue our study. And we decided to focus on the migrant workers in 3 Micronesian countries and the impact of those foreign workers having to leave the countries due to COVID-19. And I also would like to acknowledge my co-authors of this paper. So yeah, we've heard this morning as well that the climate change is widespread, rapid, and intensifying. And in particular, coastal areas will see continued sea level rise throughout this century, contributing to more frequent and severe coastal flooding in low-lying areas and coastal erosion. Extreme sea level events that previously occurred once in 100 years could happen every year by the end of this century. And many low-lying coastal cities and small islands will be exposed to risks of flooding and land loss annually by 2050, especially without strong adaptation measures. So this is an overview by UNFCCC framework, UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. And you see the human mobility right here. Yeah, right here, as being acknowledged as one of the non-economic losses caused by slow onset events. You see here, well, slow onset events refer to the events that happen gradually, incrementally over many years. And as some have pointed out this morning, those slow onset events are sometimes difficult to attribute to a particular cause. So human mobility caused by a number of environmental changes, and sometimes it's difficult to pinpoint what was the cause. There are multiple causes and sort of cascading impacts leading to those big events. And extreme events refer to events which happen suddenly in a matter of days or hours, such as big storms and things like that. Well, Shanna has mentioned this morning that the majority of migration actually occurs within the countries. And this aspect has not been studied well enough, despite the magnitude of the events. And in response to that, the World Bank has issued two reports, Groundswell number 1 and number 2. And the most recent report, Groundswell 2, Volume 2, was published last year, and it looked at the regions that the World Bank is providing support and analyzed the domestic movements of people. And the report highlights that by 2050, without concrete climate and development action, climate change could lead to more than 260 million people having to move within those 6 regions. And the reasons for people's movement is that people will have to migrate from areas with lower water availability and crop productivity, and from areas affected by sea level rise and storm surges. In that kind of situations, hotspots of internal climate migration could emerge as early as 2030 and continue to spread and intensify by 2050. And this report is pointing out that big cities like Nairobi, the capital city of Kenya, for example, it could become a hotspot. It is highly elevated, so the climate-wise, they can sort of have more people sort of flooding into the city, and the city would face challenges in terms of providing basic support to those increasing population. So it's likely that we would see those hotspots around the world. So speaking of COVID, just to sort of recap the magnitude, as of yesterday, the world has seen over 600 million people cases of COVID-19, which includes more than 6 million people having passed away. And you see the curve here. The cases have peaked out globally, but then we do still feel the impacts of the pandemic. And sort of focusing on the 3 Micronesian countries, Palau, Marshall Islands, and Federated States of Micronesia. They've taken isolation policy when there was a declaration of the pandemic by WHO. In March 2020, they quickly closed their borders, all the borders. They did not allow any foreign visitors to enter the country, and they went through a long period of isolation. And I think it was quite successful in sort of protecting the country from the pandemic. And then they gradually reopened their borders and went through recovery period. And there was a big conference called Our Ocean Conference held in Palau in April, which was sort of very symbolic in reopening the region to the international community. And we also observed an outbreak of COVID in Marshall Islands last month, but due to very quick support from US CDC and Taiwan, they quickly declared sort of the peaking out of the pandemic, and they're reopening their borders, in fact, today. Yeah, and I should have mentioned that during the pandemic, because Palau is so dependent on tourism as an industry, Palau's economy shrank by 11.5% 4% in 2020 due to lack of tourists coming in, and as a region, at least 4.9% decrease in the GDP is likely. So when we look at migrant workers in those three countries, over here you see the Federated States of Micronesia, Palau, and the Marshall Islands have a significant number of foreign workers, and especially Palau, they have the smallest population among these three countries, but then it has the largest number of migrant workers. And who compose those migrant workers in these three countries? In FSM, there are a number of highly skilled migrant workers from Japan and other parts of the world. And Japan, of course, has a strong sort of historical relationship with FSM. And in Palau, foreign workers actually account for 55% of the Palau workforce, more than half. And they're called guest workers. And in their national policy, guest workers is seen as an important, significant part of their national workforce. And in Marshall Islands, a number of Fijian nurses and teachers are employed as highly skilled workers, and and also some professionals come from US to contribute to the workforce. So in this paper, we defined highly skilled migrant workers as people who are hired from abroad owing to insufficient supply of national personnel possessing the same skills. So this shows the flows of migrant workers from abroad to these three countries. So I've just explained that there are workers from Japan moving to FSM, and a huge population from the Philippines working in Palau, and to Marshall Islands from US and Fiji. So the objective of this particular study was to examine the situations in the FSM, Palau, and the RMI, where foreign workers leave their duty stations to return home under the conditions of the COVID-19 pandemic in order to learn from and develop possible solutions to alleviate the problems observed in these three countries. So we did as a methodology, we carried out literature surveys, semi-structured interviews. This all had to be online due to the pandemic, but we struggled, but we managed to interview 16 people, and you see the composition here. So these are the questions that we raised to the informants. We basically use the same set of questions to for the three countries. We asked if they knew a person who left, for example, for SFM after the COVID outbreak, and from which country did the person originate, and in what sort of work the person used to be engaged in. We asked whether there were any problems, and what will be sort of the what were sort of the measures to avoid problems caused by the absence of persons being back home or who have left the country. And then the results were the following. In FSM, there was a case where the president and some faculty members of Xavier High School in the Truk Islands of FSM were stranded in Guam for more than half a year. And Xavier High School is the top high school in FSM and also for the region. So the impact was quite big, not having faculty members in the country. There were also difficulties in managing high schools without key staff on the ground, as you can imagine. On Pohnpei Island, the state-run hospital suffered a severe shortage of staff. This is on the medical side, and another example from educational institution is that the College of Micronesia provided distance education through the internet for some classes due to international faculty members returning to their home countries. Well, next, the situations in Palau. As I mentioned, almost half of the country's workforce is composed of foreign workers in Palau, Filipinos, Chinese, Bangladeshi, Japanese, and Americans. So the impact was quite significant. The lack of tourism had a big impact, and as a whole, 4/5 or 2/3 of foreign migrants seem to have left the country during the pandemic. And for instance, Japanese residents out of 400, half have seemed to left, either for good or temporarily. Foreigners engaged in medical and educational fields. However, foreigners engaged in medical and educational fields mostly remained in the country. Whereas people who were engaged in tourism sector have left the country because there were no work basically so they were sort of put in a situation that they wouldn't have monthly salary. And in terms of diplomatic community and aid workers, most of them have remained in the country except for JOCV, the Japanese volunteers. And the country was COVID-free in April, as early as April 2020, but the schools were closed and shifted most of the classes to online formats. We also heard that an ODA activity, because the JOCV have left, the waste disposal site supported by Japanese ODA was managed with local human resources, and this was done due to web training provided by the experts during that time. Now we would like to look at the results of the Marshall Islands. In April 2020, missionaries from the LDS Church and several Australians took a chartered flight to leave Majuro, the capital city of Marshall Islands, for Brisbane. And also missionaries at churches and mission schools abruptly left the country, which caused a lack of leaders and teachers to conduct church services and classes in schools. In Marshall Islands as well, the JOCV, Japanese volunteers, have left, and because of that, there were no longer enough teachers in primary and secondary schools. The absence of JICA's senior volunteers impacted the operations of some institutions, such as the garbage incineration plant in Majuro. That was sort of a testimony from our colleagues in Majuro. And because of that, the government, RMI government, chartered a Fiji Airways flight in late November 2020 to bring 49 essential workers from Fiji to kind of fill this gap. So learning from these results, we would like to propose 3 discussion points and potential policy implications. We think that the role of remote work environment is very important. I think we all can sort of relate to that. Distance education and telemedicine should be conducted in SIDS, not only during an emergency, but also during non-emergency phase to have that kind of facility sort of institutionalized and developed. And the second point is the importance of distance learning, even for COVID-19 free nations. Distance education is one of the promising possible solutions to address the limited availability of on-campus education in the developing world. And for that, fast internet access is necessary infrastructure. Thirdly, sort of in the similar line, telemedicine should become a part of a routine operation in medical field. Telemedicine became popular in the developed world and is an effective way to address the imbalance in the availability of medical workers between rural and urban areas in developing states. And we also found that there was a successful case in FSM where a technician in Micronesia sent patients' scanned tissue to pathologists in Japan for diagnosis, and it worked well. So this is a summary of a possible paucity of highly skilled migrant workers and possible proposed countermeasures for administration and management. As a measure, remote work environment is essential for education, distance learning, and for medical services. Telemedicine is one of the key measures. So as conclusion, okay, I'll go through very quickly. So the Micronesian countries took isolation policies and it proved effective that distance education and telemedicine served as effective measures to address the situation of sudden evaporation of highly skilled migrant workers in these countries. And these systems should be developed step by step during non-emergency times. So I would like to end here. Thank you very much for your attention.
We might have time for one question. It's an extraordinarily rich presentation. Any questions from the room? Okay.
Thank you so much for your presentation. I was curious, so the sort of concluding remarks that you had were framed around resolving a lack of capacity in the countries that you were studying. To what extent did your research consider like building capacity or existing programs to build capacity in nations so that communities there can meet their own needs and also kind of define what careers and jobs that they want and see value in?
Yeah, thank you very much for this great question. I think it's extremely important to build local capacity. So they're not always dependent on foreign or international input. And most of the aid programs, the way they work is they have combination of local experts and international experts. So the idea is that they work together and then they train local capacities so that they can execute the majority of work. And when there are any needs for international advice, and they still have the means to do so. So I would say it's very important to train local staff, and but there's also an issue of brain drain. where people have the capacities and aspirations, they, tend to leave the country. But then there's also an evidence that some of those experts do come back to their home country with higher skills, rich experience to serve for the country again.
Thank you so much. Perhaps we can return to this exchange in this paper in a roundtable just a little bit. Next, we have Dr. Ryo Fujikura, professor at Hosei University and presently serving dean of Hosei Graduate School of Environmental Management. Dr. Fujikura received his BA and MA at the University of Tokyo and his doctorate from Innsbruck University, very lovely city. He served as an officer of the Environment Agency, presently the Ministry of the Environment of the Japanese government between 1984 and 1995. From 1991 to 1993, he was seconded as an environmental expert to the Overseas Economic Cooperation Fund, presently the Japan International Cooperation Agency. Please remain welcome, Dr. Fujikura.
Thank you, Alex. I wonder where do you received my career? I didn't give you my CV to you. After 30 minutes of lunch, it's a time for take a nap. During your sleeping, I finished my presentation. Yes, my title of my presentation is Alternatives for Marshall Islands to Cope with the Anticipated Sea Level Rise by Climate Change. So the latest IPCC report states that global sea level rise is projected to rise between 38 centimeters and 77 centimeters by the year of 2100. Atoll countries like Marshall Islands are particularly vulnerable to sea level rise. The media often reports that such countries will soon be submerged. However, even if it does not reach such a situation, rising sea level will affect the life at all islands. It will cause seawater intrusion into the groundwater layer. It makes some wells unusable. While climate change generally increases precipitations, rainfall patterns also changes and increases the risk of water shortages for those who depend on rainwater for domestic use. In other words, climate change could pose a threat to drinking water supplies. Storm surge damage will also increase. In Majuro, some tombstones have been washed away by storm surge. So this study considered what alternatives the people of the Marshall Islands might have if climate change and resulting sea level rise made it difficult for them to maintain their way of life. 4 alternatives were considered here. First, immigration to a developed country. We assume that the United States as a destination. Second, immigration to a neighboring island station. Here, Fiji is assumed. The third alternative is land reclamation and raising. The fourth is to build floating platform on the neighboring seas. The purpose of the study is to identify advantages and disadvantages of each. Then we try to determine which is relatively better for future life of the Marshallese. The first alternative is immigration to the United States. So all of you already know that the Marshall Islands has a COFA with the US. So Marshall Islands citizens can enter, stay, work, and study in the US without a visa or work permission. It is estimated about 30,000 Marshallese are now living in the United States. when we interviewed university students at the University of South Pacific in Majuro, 60% were willing to go to the US. The motivation are education, jobs, and Medicare. Some have family living there, and they were expecting to live with their family. Only few students answered climate change or sea level rise as a motivation. In fact, many Marshallese actually live in places like Hawaii, Arkansas, and Oregon. However, life in the US is not always easy. Some people are unable to be integrated into their host communities. The largest community of Marshallese abroad is Springdale, Arkansas. About 20,000 people are living. Many Marshallese came to Springdale because their family members or relatives had already been there. Their families invited them to come and live together. There are some factories which provide jobs as low-skilled factory workers. One of them is chicken meat processing factory. Many people left Marshall Islands very soon when they were invited. Some young people immediately withdrew school and came to Springdale. So very few spent more than a year for preparing to come to the United States. Many are living with their families. The challenge there is that they have not been issued official identification from the US government. Some of them cannot commute regularly to their working place. Some cannot properly understand their supervisor's instructions due to the lack of English proficiency. Many obtain a high school diploma in Marshall Islands, but the credentials are not recognized in the US. As a result, half are unemployed. The second alternative is to migrate to Fiji. It was the second popular destination after the US among the university students. The president of Fiji stated that the Kiribati people can move to Fiji with dignity if necessary. Like those in the US, their English proficiency affects their subsequent lives. The different culture and customs in Fiji from the Marshall Islands can be another challenge. I would like to introduce you an example of relocation from atoll islands to a volcanic island, although it is not international, but internal migrations. Relocation has already begun from Carteret Islands to Bougainville Islands in Papua New Guinea. The island comprises 6 atolls with a combined land area of 0.6 square kilometers. About 3,000 people are living. Taro used to be the main staple food crop, but it cannot grow anymore due to saltwater intrusion and salinization of soil and water. Freshwater wells have been already contaminated by saltwater. In the year of 2009, the first relocation started. The Catholic Church provided the relocatees with 295 hectares land altogether as the 4 relocation sites. In order to relocate all people, however, another 1,500 hectares of land is necessary. But acquiring legal title to land is very difficult due to customary land tenure and financial constraints. People are also concerned the loss of traditional lifestyles, loss of local language, and changes in religious practices. Younger islanders are rather accepting the relocation, but elderlies are hesitant. The third alternative is to land reclamation and raising. This has already been done in Maldives, another atoll country on the Indian Ocean. An artificial island called Fulmare is being completed. Ms. Sakamoto will report on this case in detail after me. The Maldivian government is building various facilities to encourage people who live scattered across many atolls to move to Fulmare. So yesterday I discussed it with the two Marshallese living here. They said reclamation rising is a good idea. However, the biggest challenge related to this alternative is the cost. Maldives is rich enough to develop a new land, but most of the Pacific Island states, including Marshall Islands, definitely need financial aid to do so. While construction cost may be provided by donors, maintenance cost cannot be expected. Also, many people in the Pacific Island countries are so much integrated with the land. Land and life are an integrated part of one another, so that they would likely be reluctant to put soil on their land. Furthermore, land ownership in this region is customary and complex. These issues may hinder the development of the land reclamation, even some funds are available. The fourth alternative is to develop an artificial platform, floating platforms. The technology is already proven. Some floating platforms have already been constructed for the exploitation of undersea resources. It is also being considered as a possible alternative for adapting to sea level rise. The Japanese Shimizu Corporation, for example, has proposed a very, very ambitious project to build an artificial island in the equatorial Pacific Ocean. Its radius is 3,000 meters with a height of 1,000 meters. 40,000 people would live and feed themselves. However, the cost of the project will be extremely high. It will exceed 10 billion US dollar. So we have tried to evaluate which of these four alternatives is relatively preferable. 8 Japanese people conducted the evaluation. The 8 people were divided into 4 groups of 2, each deal with one of the alternatives. Then every group evaluated each of the 16 criteria regarding life after move. The feasibility of 4 options were not considered at all. We used Likert type scale from 5 significantly improve to 1 significantly degrade. Estimations were made based on literature survey, our previous studies on the livelihood of Marshallese immigrants in Arkansas and Oregon, and interviews with people who are knowledgeable about the Marshallese both in their home country and in the United States. The result is shown in table 1. Regarding the alternative 1, that meaning immigrate to the United States, the result is following. First, housing scored 3, because the increased income will not exceed the increased housing cost in the United States, and that housing situation will not change much. Similarly, purchasing power scored 3, because the relationship between the rate of increase in income and price difference between the 2 countries. Food security was scored 4 by comparing the nutritional state of the people in Marshall Islands and the health data of immigrants in Arkansas. The safety score was 3, since both countries are equally safe. The score for education was 5, due to the large difference in educational opportunities between them. Social service also scored 5, since the United States has social security programs, while Marshall Islands does not. Healthcare also received score 5, because the healthcare that people can access in the United States is better than that of Marshall Islands. In this way, we evaluated each alternative. The next step is to rank the desirability of 4 alternatives. We applied analytic hierarchy process. It is a method for comparing alternatives with many criteria. Detail of the methodology is shown in our paper. We further assume 3 different cases. Case 1 is the case where all 16 criteria have the same importance. Case 2 is the case where the social environment is considered more important, For example, safety and education are regarded more important. Case 3 is the case when personal environment is more important. For example, housing and food security are regarded more important. The results are shown in table 3. The larger number, the more preferable. In all 3 cases, alternative 1 to relocate the United States was the most desirable option, with the floating platform coming in second. Although these results are only trial evaluation by Japanese researchers, they might serve as a useful information for the consideration on the future of the Marshall Islands. There are many issues to be considered in our future study. First of all, even though we referred to several previous studies, the evaluation was simply based on the judgment of Japanese researchers. It is crucial to invite Marshallese, both those living in Marshall Islands and those already living abroad, to the study. In addition, the immigration so far has been voluntary. However, in the case of involuntary immigration due to climate change or sea level rise, some other factors may have to be considered. In addition, the international situation will continue to change. For example, discussion on adaptation and/or refugees are taking place in various international arenas, as discussed at the morning session. An international support framework for involuntary climate change-related displacement might be created. These factors need to be taken into account in the study. So thank you very much for your attention.
Any questions for our last? We'll start with Ryan.
I may have missed part of this, but in terms of the 4 options, there's obviously a cost that goes with each of them. In the floating islands, is that a reasonable cost, or is that just astronomical in terms of what it would cost to do something like that?
So actually, we ignore the feasibility of the 4 options. We only consider the life after good. So I think option 4 is so far infeasible.
Yeah. And option 3 also.
But reclamation is already implemented in Maldives.
On a small scale, though, in the Maldives, yeah, but the population of that particular island compared to the broader Pacific and what that would need, it's just not even comparable in terms of scale, I don't think.
But probably it might be possible if the fund is available. Some kind of reclamation over building a dike would be possible. So it's more feasible than the option 4. Yeah.
Thank you.
Just as a course, I try to answer your question. That is, in the Maldives, they will accommodate 250,000 of the people, half the population of the nation. So it's huge enough to accommodate even the entire population of the Maldives. And as for the cost of the floating city, we interviewed the civil corporation, and they refused to talk about the cost simply because they have so many options to calculate the cost, and it's too early, and they didn't want to mislead society regarding cost of the floating.
Thank you so much for the interesting presentations. Yeah, maybe to rebound also on Ryan's question about what would be also the environmental impact, because land reclamation environmental impact as well, and the floating, like does this company make environmental impact assessments? And yeah, thank you.
I would like to recommend you to access the website of Shimizu Corporation, and they demonstrate how its construction is environmentally sound. They introduced a very special way of constructions. And so you'll be probably surprised at how huge the project is. So therefore, the staff of engineers of Shimizu Corporation do not explicitly shows how much it is, but he just says, "Oh, it's about 10 billion yen." That's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. One more question. Of particular interest to Pacific nations is their own sovereignty, and maintaining sovereignty, especially as formerly colonized places. And how does the framework that you provided engage with sort of ideas around geopolitics and sovereignty? So for example, the Shimizu Corporation, who owns, like what country are they accountable to? Since right, the ocean has different laws. So how does sovereignty play into any of these pathways?
Yeah, I think that, for example, Shimizu Corporation is working with Kiribati or some, Kiribati. They are talking, but I don't think they discuss about financial issues. It's still it's a kind of dream, I feel. But anyway, they are considering to construct under the equatorial. So is that my answer?
Thank you.
Last questions for you. Oh, please. We have a few minutes. Still have a few minutes, please.
Yeah, it's interesting to see what drives people wanting to migrate, and I think the access to health service was a big part. And then since the limited, based on the limited number of interviews that I had with Marshallese people here, they seem to have a problem. Well, the health services are there, but then in terms of accessing the services, because of lack of having health insurances and so on. So there seems to be a big expectation, which might not be met after migration. And when I did a study on Kiribati population migrating to Fiji, they actually had the same level of access to medical services as Fijian population. And I was quite surprised. And I asked quite a few people and they all confirmed. So yeah, I know it's a very important aspect for people to migrate. And it may not be just the issue of migrants, just access to healthcare, but to have any perspective on that?
It is a very difficult question to answer. But well, we assume that the Marshallese or the immigrant will receive similar right or treatment of Medicare, education. So we don't assume that how difficult to access to the service, right? So yeah, in order to make the issues easier, so we don't take this kind of accessibility into consideration. Yeah, for example, the school. Yeah, if the immigrant have a home, they're fairly multi-place in the U.S. So in this case, they cannot access the school education. So we don't. We take a very simple assumption to evaluate each criteria.
Carl, please. Sorry.
I was wondering, in the surveys that you did, and when you analyzed the results, did you disaggregate, for gender or for age? I mean, did you see difference in how men or women thought of the options, or how young people and old people thought of the options?
Yeah, if we take these factors into the consideration, it makes the evaluation too difficult. So each case, two Japanese people simply discussed and based on very simple assumptions. So no gender difference, no age difference, or accessibility. But so very rough estimation. So maybe this is the another issue to be considered into the future study.
I was thinking more about the people who are talking, the people whose opinions you were getting, because it may be that young people might be more willing to try something than older people, in terms of what the options are, or something like that.
Yes, I agree.
No last interventions. Maybe we should go ahead and before we can return back to these, I think actually 5 models of potential futurity: migration externally, migration internally to the Pacific, land reclamation, floating islands, and then infrastructure development. You mentioned building dikes, or so, which might be a little bit different than land reclamation. 5 really interesting dynamics here. So thank you so much again. And this brings us to our next talk. Akiko Sakamoto, who serves as the Secretary General of the Global Infrastructure Fund, Research Japan. She's worked at the Global Infrastructure Fund since 2008, after leaving her prior position at Mitsubishi Research Group. Over to you. With migrating impacts of climate change, induced sea level rise by infrastructure development, in the case of the Maldives. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mayer. Hello, everyone. Thank you for your interest for my study. I would like to introduce Himare, the artificial island in the Maldives, as an example of the infrastructure to cope with sea level rise. First, the background of the study. As you know, there are 4 atoll countries in the world, and among them, the average elevation of the Maldives is the lowest, as on the table. We can say that the Maldives is the most vulnerable to the future sea level rise. The government of the Maldives has made a decision to build an artificial island called Himare as a measure to cope with sea level rise. This is a whole view of Himare in 2018. And then, yes, at the right corner, there is an international airport. And the square area in the middle is the phase 1 construction of the Himare. And the phase 2 area is on the right corner. And the length of Himare is about 5 kilometers long. I visited Himare in this August and had a meeting with the HDC, the Housing Development Corporation, state-owned company which is in charge of construction of Himare. They said that the work of the phase 2 will be finished in 2030, but it may be delayed due to the COVID-19. Himare is connected to the capital city Mare by the bridge called Shina Mare Bridge, which is about 1.4 kilometers long. The construction of the Himare began in 1997. A new land was built by pumping sand from the seafloor onto a submerged coral platform that rose about 2 meters above sea level, which was twice as high as Mare. After the success of Phase 1, Phase 2 started in 2014 and was completed in about a year. The total cost of Phase 1 was 32 million US dollars, which was financed entirely from the national state budget. For Phase 2, investment costs are 160 million US dollars. After the completion of Phase 1 in 2024, the first 1,000 people officially migrated to Harshmare. According to HTC, now there are more than 19,000 people living in Harshmare. By the mid-2020s, 240 people are expected to live in the city, as Dr. Nakayama pointed out. In addition to coping with sea level rise, there are other reasons for the government to build an artificial island. First, it mitigates the dense population of the capital. The city of Mare is notorious for being one of the most populated cities in the world. Unlike people's image of Maldives being a gorgeous beach resort, the capital has problems of public security, hygiene, and living conditions. Harshmare may solve this problem by offering a larger land to disperse the population. The second is to make Harshmare the economic and administrative center. Now Harshmare has a commercial zone, factories, and transportation hub for tourists. HTC is trying to attract major investment in Harshmare. The land developed in Phase 2 will be used to provide employment to approximately 85,000 people. The photo is the HTC headquarters in Harshmare. And some more photos of Harshmare that I took in August. There are beautiful parks. A beautiful park and new apartments and commercial buildings and constructions are undergoing all around the city. Yes, it's a very beautiful place. Other countries may employ the same method as the Maldives to adapt to the anticipated sea level rise. Reducing the impact of migration and helping migrants transition to their new lives are key factors for a natural country when considering the option of an artificial island. Therefore, the purpose of this study was to identify measures to reduce the potential impact of migration in artificial islands. This study aimed to identify measures that work effectively to satisfy migrants that move to Harshmare. Materials and methods of the study. Literature review. So we analyzed the statistical data provided by the Maldivian government to obtain information on the changing lifestyle preferences of Maldivians and the varying conditions in the Malay region, including Harshmare, and information to examine ways to promote migration from islands other than Malay and settlement in Harshmare. Survey by questionnaire. A questionnaire survey was conducted to investigate the factors that accounted for changes in life satisfaction in those who migrated to Harshmare. Questions were about the characteristics of the respondents and the level of satisfaction after moving to Harshmare. The survey was conducted online from May 8 to 23, 2021. And interviews. In order to obtain information on the current status of migration to Harshmare and details to evaluate the results of the questionnaire, interviews were conducted with 4 individuals who had extensive knowledge of Maldivian society and her humanity. Here are the questions about the level of satisfaction after moving to her humanity. I'm sorry, the characters are too small, so I would like to read it out. So, from the top, housing, convenience of everyday life, for example, shopping, transportation, access to public facilities, purchasing power, the financial ability to buy products and services, availability of food, safety, opportunity for education, social services, for example, social insurance, welfare, nursing, consultation, healthcare, employment opportunity, family relationship, opportunity to participate in religious ceremonies, opportunity to participate in community events. Respondents were asked to self-evaluate their life changes resulting from the move to Harihimare. They were asked to rate their satisfaction on a 5-point Likert scale, ranging from worse to better. Here are some results of the literature reviews. The national average income grew by almost 240% between 2003 and 2019. The income gap between the Malay region and the other region widened to about 250% in 2010 and has remained at 200% from 2010 to 19. New jobs such as finance, information technology, insurance, real estate, etc. are increasing in Malay region. The employees of education and healthcare have shown significant growth nationwide. The rate of increase in the Malay region is much higher than that in the other regions. The results of the questionnaire survey. We got responses from 47 residents who live in Harihimare. 21 were men and 26 were women. Average number of years in Harihimare was 8.5. Before moving to Harihimare, 70 respondents lived in Malay, 25 lived on islands other than Malay, and 5 lived outside of the Maldives. Migrants from other islands are more satisfied than those from Malay regarding convenience of everyday life, healthcare, social services, and food. Migrants from other islands who changed their occupation are less satisfied than those who did not change their occupation after migration. So please look at the graph on the left. I'm sorry, the characters are too small. And the white bar is no change of occupation after migration, and the white bar is change of occupation. The largest gap are education, purchasing power, social services. Many respondents answered the same for the psychological impact of migration, making it difficult to identify clear trends by respondents' attributes. The result of the interviews. Sea level rise is still not the main motivation for people to move to Harihimare. Many people migrated to Harihimare in search of better jobs. In general, Maldivians are not afraid of changing jobs and are in search of higher salaries and better working conditions. Many people cite education as a reason for in-country migration. Malay and Harihimare have a greater number and variety of stores, restaurants, and schools than the outlying islands, providing a wider range of choices for people. The standard of living and educational opportunities continue to make Male and Harhumare attractive to migrants from other islands. Most people who consider moving to Harhumare from other islands already have relatives or friends there. A relationship with the community to which migrants originally belonged is maintained. The Maldivian people have a strong family and local communities, and Maldivians are generally skilled in building a new relationship. No one reported feeling lonely or isolated after moving to Harhumare. As almost 100% of Maldivians are Sunni Muslims, there is no difference in religion by region. Religious activities in Harhumare are likely to be the same as before migration. Conclusion from the literature review. The Greater Malay region, including Harhumare, has witnessed a shift in industrial structure from primary and secondary industries to tertiary industries. In particular, there has been a significant increase in the number of people employed in business services, such as finance, education, and health services. Furthermore, the average income in Malay region has improved significantly, and the income gap between Malay region and the other islands are great. Conclusion from the survey questionnaire. People who migrated to Harhumare from other islands were more satisfied with their lives than those who moved from Malay to Harhumare. Among the migrants from other islands, those who changed their jobs were less satisfied with their lives than those who did not change their jobs after migration to Harhumare. Conclusion of the interviews. The major motivation for migrating to Harhumare are education and employment, and not sea level rise. Harhumare is a highly attractive destination for Maldivians to migrate to, and many people are moving there voluntarily. The problems of isolation and loneliness associated with migration to Harhumare has not been considered. So, discussion. Steps needed to encourage voluntary migration to voluntary migration and resettlement. Sea level rise is not an urgent concern for most of the Maldivian people. They are moving to Harhumare voluntarily because Harhumare has an urban attraction for the people. The new type of jobs such as finance, high-tech, real estate, and other skilled professionals are created in Malay region, including Harhumare, for these 2 decades. Higher income and non-physical jobs are favorable, especially for young people in other areas. The significant increase in national income has led to an increase in purchasing power. A wide variety of commercial development is necessary for the more powerful consumers. There is also a high need for health service and education. Thus, it would be ideal to use the new land in Harhumare to promote new high value-added industries, increase employment, especially white-collar jobs, and attract high-level educational institutions and hospitals from abroad. Discussion 2. Steps needed to increase the level of satisfaction after migration. In the future, as new industry develops in Harhumare, it is expected that the percentage of people whose jobs will change due to migration will increase significantly. Currently, migration to Harhumare is voluntary, but there is a possibility that the number of involuntary migrants will increase in the future due to sea level rise. Thus, it may become necessary to accept migrants with more diverse income levels and abilities. Career mediation programs to enable migrants to secure jobs that are similar to their previous ones, vocational training programs to enable people to adapt smoothly to new jobs are necessary. The relationship of family, relatives, and friends keeps people away from loneliness and isolation caused by migration. Convenient transportation facility between the place of origin and Harhimare may reduce the stress of migrants. Use IT to strengthen people-to-people relationship is one of the measures to maintain the relationship and mitigate the impact of migration. So, future research topics. The results of the interview survey, which showed that Maldivians are not bothered by changing jobs, contradict the results of the questionnaire survey, which showed that those who changed jobs before and after migration were less satisfied with their lives after migration. There is a need for more in-depth research on migrant stress after migration in relation to changes in their job or work environment. So, from the result of the interviews, there is a certain number of people who do not live permanently in Harhimare and intend to return to their original place of residence in the future. It may be one of the reasons why the psychological problem of migration has not surfaced. Comparing those who intend to live permanently on Harhimare and those who intend to return to their original place may help to determine what measures are needed for those who live in an other country and are left with no choice but to live permanently on an artificial island due to sea level rise in the future. So thank you for your attention.
Any questions on this last part?
Thank you. That was very interesting. I'm curious. This is a nice new development with lots of amenities. They hope to have nice, good schools and white-collar jobs. What happens if everything goes right? Who moves there and who is left behind? You have one island that is advanced and one island that is poor. Has there been any talk about what happens to the people who don't move to Mali?
I'm sorry, I cannot respond to your question shortly, but as I mentioned in the interviews, and the expert of the Maldives pointed out that the Maldivian people are not afraid of changing jobs. They are so challenging to new environment. So the people will be accustomed to new environment step by step, and if someone moved to Harhimare, he or she will call his or her family onto the land, so there would be no one left behind the small island. So this is the most ideal scenario for the Maldivian government, I suppose. I'm not sure this would happen really, but it is possible for the Maldivian people.
Scott?
I had a similar question too about some reasons that people might not want to move. So it sounds like it might be more of a financial decision for those who are able to move. But what might be some compelling reasons to stay?
Yes, and the result of the interviews and Maldivian people have strong attachment to their original land. So some people might do not want to move. But as I said before, if someone moves to Haruhimare, he or she calls their family. And I suppose the Maldivian society is a very strong trend that the father of the family is very strong opinion of all of the family members. So if the one father decide to move, their children and his children and his parents and his wife's parents all move to Haruhimare. So this is what's happening in Maldives, I suppose.
Vicky and then Juko.
My question had also the first question. I was just because I didn't really understand what is the process of moving. Like, can people get rejected if they wanted to move and then they like? Because I think the first question was a good question about like who gets to live there and who does not get to live there, and then that also brought me to think like, is there a process to moving? Like, is there a chance of like someone getting rejected for one reason or another if they wanted to move there, and for what?
So actually, from this survey, we didn't ask people why they come here. So and actually, we are conducting another questionnaire survey right now in Haruhimare, and from this result, there are more than half of the people moving from Mare to Haruhimare. So moving from Mare to Haruhimare is very easy migration because it is very close. So it's like moving to another city in one country. So they have no stress on moving to here, and as I just said, Mare is not in good condition for living. So people like Haruhimare, and so I'm not sure why and people don't want to move, but I have to conduct further research to prove that reason.
Juko and then Vicky.
Yeah, my question is, maybe you said it and I didn't get it, but what's the elevation of Haruhimare?
2 meters.
2 meters.
Yes.
So like it's enough to consider. Okay.
The worst scenario of the sea level rise is 1 meter in 100 years. So an average 2 meter is enough for
100 years.
At least 100 years. I suppose.
Yeah, well, I'm not one of the authors of the Akiko paper, but I also work on Haruhimare. And first of all, it should be noted that there is no forcible mechanism to move people from their present place to Haruhimare, because Haruhimare is developed by a private corporation. Also, it is owned 100% by the country, so you have to purchase land or apartment house to move. And nobody will be rejected as long as they can pay for the land or for the apartment. I hope I answered your question.
I'm sorry. Thank you, Dr. Maekawa.
First, the fantastic question, is the free market a sign of equity? dignity to the framework of this conversation.
Let's hope.
Fully.
Thank you so much for your presentation. I was curious to what extent is there poverty in the Maldives, and how does that factor into the study? Is there any attention to maybe for future studies, people who are left behind and people who are lacking the financial resources to purchase land or purchase an apartment in what appears to be a very sort of like high value neighborhood, and how might that play into future research?
The cost of living and the acquisition cost of housing is very high in the Harpimare. And the Maldivian government has noticed that it's the problem. So they are trying to get the cost lower to provide some kind of apartment which is for the people who has a low budget. And so this would be the solution. But I think that most of the people are not in urgent need to move to Harpimare. So this problem is not surfaced yet. But in the end, after the sea level rise progresses, it would be problematic.
Thank you.
We'll take our last two questions. I'm not sure who's first. Okay. Thanks.
I was wondering, the land there, is it private ownership or is it a ancestral right?
This is a long-term lease from the government, 99 years of lease.
Tammy, our last question.
I just wanted to ask, and maybe I missed this in the presentation. What aspect
That's
of
a pretty big question for my question.
My question is, what aspects of mitigating impacts of sea level rise is the Maldives government getting from having that artificial land built? I mean, you talk about infrastructural development, but I'm more interested in mitigating the impacts of sea level rise experience in the capital city, and then what are their aspects of the government mitigating that by providing maybe an opportunity for people to move to the artificial island and maybe access to other job opportunities. So I'm just interested in the mitigating aspects. What is the government of Maldives getting from having that artificial island?
This, as far as I know, the Maldivian government has nothing to do especially to move people from other islands to Harpimare. So the people are moving to Harpimare voluntarily. So just seeking for the good jobs or good services or something like that. So, and can I answer to your question rightly? I'm sorry, I don't get your meaning.
Yeah, no, because in one of your tables presented that Maldives is a 1 meter higher than the sea level rise, and so you said that the new artificial island is about 2 meters, and so 2 meters is roughly going to be impacted by sea level rise as well. So my question was directly more to like, what are they mitigating by establishing that new artificial island, especially when we talk about impacts of climate change?
Another artificial island?
Oh no, that island that the
You mean
Malay,
like
that
ISO or like
Like mitigation in terms of like reduction of CO2? Is that what you mean, or?
No, because I'm just looking at the focus of your talk, which is mitigating the impacts of sea level rise. And so I'm interested in knowing what are some of the impacts of sea level rise that the government of Maldives is mitigating by establishing or creating that new artificial island. So that's kind of what my question is directed towards.
So I'm sorry, I don't get. So you are interested in the environmental measures for the artificial island?
So is the question if it's still between 1 meter is 2 meters long?
Yes.
What is the island doing to mitigate?
To mitigate.
Like they built the island, so what is that doing to mitigate the problem?
The resilience of the island?
No, like how
You're
are they-
mitigating the sea level rise. First time you're mitigating the impact of sea level rise.
So I wanted to know the impacts, like what kind of impacts are you trying to mitigate, or are you mitigating by establishing that? So are you, by establishing that artificial island, are we mitigating problems that are faced in the city, the Mali city, or not, or?
Yeah, exactly. It is what I meant. But whether 2 meters are sufficient enough is still under dispute between scientists and government among this. But the idea is the Maldivian government says that 2 meters are sufficiently high to avoid the issue for under 1 century.
So
But
they are mitigating the loss of land based on the elevation.
Does it mitigate the saltwater intrusion?
More king tides or, tsunamis coming higher due to sea level rise, so it's not just like gradual sea level rise that we need to cope with. So I don't know whether they're building additional seawalls or patrol line, maybe that's something that you're trying to get at.
Yes, thank you. I'm sorry.
Thanks, Tim. I think it was a great question. It's 2 meters ago. Boy, I think Maldives is such an interesting comparison case. Oh gosh, hey, I've been writing about the Maldives tuna fisheries the last couple of years, but among other things that are possibly relevant to the question of what's being mitigated, the Maldives have no recorded hurricane history, not one. So they are geophysically outside of the nearest hurricane zone. So the government's banking on no storm events, which is great, at least when I listen to like what you're raising for me, I'm like, wow, is this really a mitigation? Or is this a kind of odd political move of some sort? Is the kind of thing that you raised for me, which feels really intriguing. And then another thing about Maldives that jumps into mind, that I think somebody else was asking about just a moment ago, the entire Maldives community is only relatively recently arrived in the Maldives in the last centuries. So the entire population is non-indigenous from their own point of view. So it's a new community already. So what's being mitigated is not the loss of ancestral spaces, because everyone is thinking about the place as a relatively recent arrival, although it is obviously from all these neighbors and brothers and sisters, home space with all of the passion that comes with that. So some of those mitigation things you raised for me, I think this is really interesting. Maybe the third thing I'd love to hear Nikki or Akiko mention, but Mali is literally sinking under the weight of its own concrete. So it is like Venice. The main capital is the weight of the main capital. They have so fortified their main capital already that the coral substructure cannot hold the weight of all the buildings. That one of the densest urbanscapes on the planet. So I think that would have to be the sort of physical mitigation. Like they support so much concrete on their capital that it is a question of what's the rate of erosion and subsistence for the capital. So that might be one of the most interesting geophysical mitigations. They've built a less heavy new capital essentially. But I think Dr. Tabe has raised a really interesting and very challenging for the Maldivian government question. What are you mitigating the psychology of all that's happening? And this is not really a mitigation. This is
Almost like an avoidance.
An avoidance of dealing with something that actually is coming, no matter what, whether it's 1 century or not. Thank you for that super interesting exchange and a sense of exchange. Folks, we're still on time, if you can believe it. We've somehow managed to stay in good time. And thanks so much for the.
Thank you very much. Sorry for my.
Oh gosh, thank everybody for the chance to play about Maldives in that conversation. And to enter into our last talk of the second session. Dr. Junko Toishima specializes in marine biodiversity conservation and coral reef ecology. She received her master's degree happy to announce from the University of Hawaii for her research related to the mechanisms of coral bleaching and in her doctoral work at the Tokyo Institute of Technology for research on the impacts of marine tourism on coral reef ecosystems. Previously, she worked for Okinawa Churumuri Aquarium, where she developed various educational programs for visitors and local school students, as well as for the Ministry of the Environment of Japan, where she engaged in national marine park management and conservation, coral reef monitoring and assessment, water quality and sediment monitoring, and educational programs at local schools and other community outreach programs around coral restoration projects. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for introduction. My name is Junko Torishima. It's really nice to come back on this campus because I'm a graduate of UH. And yeah, well, Alex said I'm in coral reef ecology, but today I'm not talking about corals. So my talk today is about the paper I wrote with Professor Nakayama and my ex-colleague Nagisa Shiba on acculturation of second generation Marshallese immigrants to the United States. Sorry. Yeah, as many of my previous speakers said, there are about 30,000 Marshallese people in the United States, and this is their distribution across the states. So there are about 23% of Marshallese people in Hawaii. And as my previous speakers mentioned, they are having difficulties adapting to the host society. So one example is that they have really low college graduate rate, and also for the high schools, high school graduation rate is about 50%. So about half of the students who enrolled in high school cannot finish their program. So as you know, there are established a good number of Japanese immigrants in Hawaii, and the first generation of the immigrants, we call them Issei, brought to here as a workforce at sugar plantations. So they also had a hard time establishing their presence in this society. But the second generation or third or fourth generation were well educated, and we can say they made a social and economic success. So purpose of this study is to compare the situations surrounding the second generation of Marshallese immigrants and Japanese immigrants. So what we want to do is to see what makes difference between these two groups of people. And our intention is not to say like Japanese people are superior or Marshallese people should do what Japanese people did, but to get some hints or suggestions about like how Marshallese people can acculturate to Hawaiian society. So materials and methods. Our first plan was to come out to Hawaii and do literature survey and also interview with Marshallese immigrants. But due to COVID, we couldn't do that. So instead, we did online interviews. And so we had a total of 6 interviews, 2 researchers, 2 immigrant community leaders, and 2 NGO workers. So this NGO works supports Marshallese people, so they interact with Marshallese community a lot. And this is Immigration Museum and Library in Yokohama Yokohama, Japan, and also these are some of the books we collected about Japanese immigrants in Hawaii. Okay. So first I'd like to, okay, so here's our results. First, I would like to go over about demographic information of Marshallese people in Hawaii. No, sorry, I skipped my slide. So according to a report by State of Hawaii in 2018, Marshallese people makes about 0.7% of our total Hawaiian population and 0.3% of household. And approximately 60% of Marshallese immigrants are first generation, so they are born outside US and immigrated here. And 40% is the second generation, so they are born in Hawaii or in the United States. So the ratio of first generation and second generation is similar in Arkansas. And if you look at the age, median age by race group, Marshallese people are youngest of all ethnic groups in Hawaii. So the average is about 18 years old. And if you look at the economic state of Marshallese people in Hawaii, they actually have a very high poverty rate. So about, you can say about half of the Marshallese people in Hawaii live in poverty. So this suggests that they tend to have like low skill, low income, or entry level jobs. So this is another way to look at their economic status. So average household income of Marshallese immigrants is about $32,000. So this is again the lowest among all ethnic groups. Yeah, and for income per capita is also the lowest of all ethnic groups, about $6,000 per year. And unemployment rate is the highest for the Marshallese immigrants. It's about 18%. So this suggests Marshallese people tend to have difficulty finding jobs. So average is about 6.5. The Japanese is like have lowest unemployment rate, about 4.1%. And average family size by race group, I think Scott mentioned this also, but Marshallese have very big, tend to have big families. So average household size is 16. And if they occupy, they own the house, and if they rent their house, average is about 6%. So average family size of Marshallese people is bigger compared to other ethnic groups, and they tend to live in community and their relatives are not associated with other ethnic groups. And according to the interview we did, the family and community obligation is their highest priority over school or work. So if they need to take care of their parents or children or relatives or some community members, they have to skip their school or work. And sometimes the parents don't want their children to get higher education, because if the children get higher education, they tend to be independent and live away from the family. So this may present some barrier for children to pursue higher education. As for language ability of Marshallese people in Hawaii, half of the second generation Marshallese speak only English, and half of them are bilingual. Yeah, and so generally, you can say second generation Marshallese people have good command of English. So most of the Marshallese children, they learn Marshallese language not at school but home or church, because there's no formal education to teach Marshallese language. And if you look at the first generation, about 1/3 of generation of first generation Marshallese immigrants have difficulty speaking English, so not well or not at all. Okay, so now I turn to Japanese immigrants to Hawaii, and here is a history of immigration from Japan to Hawaii. But maybe most of you are familiar with this information, so maybe I will just go over quickly. But the immigration from Japan to Hawaii started in 1868. So the first group of immigrants from Japan were about 150 people. And then 1985, the government contracted immigrant labor started. So at that time, Hawaii needed cheap labor. So a lot of people were brought to Hawaii to work on plantations. And then Hawaii became the territory of the United States. And in 1908, conclusion of gentleman's agreement. So there were too many Japanese people by this time in Hawaii, so there were some political movements to put limit on immigration. And then, but they were working at very bad work conditions. So in 1909, there was mass strike of Japanese workers, and there are several strikes between these years. And in 1924, immigration quota law passed Congress. So this literally stopped immigration from Japan to Hawaii. And then they had the Japanese community development. In 1928, first radio broadcast of Japanese language started. So here is information on the number of immigrants from Japan. So it increased rapidly. And this in this graph it shows Japanese and Caucasian and all ethnic groups. So as of 1920, as much as 40% of Hawaiian residents were Japanese. And this is the population of second generation Japanese. So it's about it exceeded 100,000 in 1933. How about economic status of these people? So some Issei, first generation people, left the plantations and succeeded economically, but with limited political power because they were not US citizens and they couldn't vote. And after Hawaii became a territory of the United States, Japanese immigrants gained freedom to choose their own occupation. So before they had to work at the plantations, but they could choose their occupation after this. And mass labor strikes further contributed to diversification of occupation and strengthening the economic power of Japanese immigrants. And according to the census of 1924, as many as 130 56 different occupations are listed, so including like doctors, lawyers, and business owners, and etc. And if you look at the culture and education, before mid-1920, Issei were educated as Japanese. So they had Japanese style school, and they sent children to these schools. In the 1920s, so they had a mixed rate of Japanese and American. But there were a lot of social pressures on second generation Japanese to Americanize in the society. So sometimes they faced the dilemma with their parents because their parents wanted them to stay as Japanese. But after World War II, the attitude of the parents drastically changed to raise their children as American as much as possible. And so after the limitation of Japanese immigrants started in 1998, Issei people prioritized to provide the highest possible education for their children. And in 1939, 70 to 80% of Issei people, including men and women, had at least a high school level of education. So this graph shows the level of education. So about 50% of people have finished the high school, and about 10 to 20% finished higher education. About language, more than 97% of Nisei attended the Japanese school, like I said, in 1920. But so Japanese school before 1920 taught Japanese curriculum only in Japanese. But later, the forced to shift to bilingual education because Hawaiian government made a regulation for all foreign language schools to provide bilingual education. And there was some political movement for the Americanization movement. So government regulated these schools. And as Nisei mature, they became more fluent in English to the extent that their parents had difficulty communicating with the children. So if you compare the Marshallese people and Japanese immigrants, first, proportion in the population is very different because now today Japanese people makes about 20% of the population, but Marshallese people only 0.7%. So Japanese people had simply had the power of numbers, so they could do like strikes to get their voice heard, but it's very hard for Marshallese people to take such strategies. And also freedom of movement for Japanese immigrants. Once they come to Hawaii, it was not easy for them to go back to Japan. So they had no choice than stay here and adapt to the society. That's why they became more Americanized. But now Marshallese people can go back and forth freely. So according to interview, most of the Marshallese people think they are here for temporarily, and they eventually want to go back to Marshall Islands. And so that affects their cultural identity too. So Marshallese people tend to identify themselves as Marshallese, not American. But Japanese Japanese people after Nisei, especially after World War II, identified themselves as completely American, and they even fought with Japan during World War II. And also attitude towards children's education is different. So Japanese people are more enthusiastic about providing higher education for their children. So again, once again, we are not saying, Marshallese people should do as Japanese people did. But so the policy recommendation I can make from this research is first of it may be necessary to have some kind of social support system to meet the need of minor ethnic groups, because they are it's hard for them to get their voice heard politically, and so somebody has to understand their needs, what they need, and reflect that into the policy. And also, it might be helpful to provide access to educational opportunity, like such as scholarships or language courses. And also, the host society can open the opportunities for diverse jobs for Marshallese immigrants, and also on-the-job trainings might be helpful. Okay, that brings to the end of my presentation. Thank you very much.
Time for some questions. 4 minutes. Any questions for last panelist?
I was really curious about that one bullet you had about the Marshallese parents not wanting their kids to get educated because they would move home. Was that a small sample of 1 or 2 people saying that? Was there some kind of consensus on people agreeing to that? It just seemed.
Yeah, because we could only interview 6 people. That's a very small number, and but yeah, I think it was Marshallese, first generation Marshallese people who said that, but other interviewees said it's now changing. So it used to be like that, but now Marshallese parents are more keen to have higher education, provide higher education to children.
I think to add on to that, it's like they're also kind of confused on how to support their child through a Western academic lens. You know, they don't have any experience of that, so it's hard to support a child when you don't know yourself.
Yeah. We have time for one more question. Oh, and then two more questions. Let's please.
Are they popular in Oahu or these scattered groups or scattered around the island?
Yeah, we looked at the Oahu and also Big Island. So I'm not sure about other islands, but there are a good number of people on Big Island too. So there's one community called the Ocean View. So this community is older than other ones because they were brought in when they had a nuclear testing in 1970. So they're there for about 50 years. But there are some more recent immigrants in Hilo area too. And Oahu, yeah, I think there are good population here too. But we don't know like exact numbers. Nobody knows. Yeah.
Just a question. I'm interested in what's the commonality between the 2 different ethnic groups that draw you to compare both of them based on their immigration status and, you know, especially here in Hawaii.
So sorry, what was that question again?
So what was the basis of you identifying or choosing these 2 ethnic groups and comparing them, considering that they have different cultural contexts as well as history as well? So I'm interested in what drew you to compare both of them.
It's just because how can I go back? It's like yeah, if you look at the yeah, this one. Yeah, the economic status of these two groups are so different. Like Japanese people have a very good, average income and low employment and everything. And so that makes me wonder what's the difference behind these two groups. And also because we're from Japan and we have a lot of information about Japanese immigrants.
Austin.
This is more just a comment, but I would just be interested in kind of also getting to know kind of the Marshallese experience over like in the continent as opposed to here in Hawaii, because I feel like the immigration experience and migration experience here in Hawaii is vastly different from that in like Arkansas.
Yeah.
So I would assume to say that the Marshallese community in Arkansas, I think, are successful and have been successful. And I think a lot of that has to do with the social experiences that they have over here. Just a comment.
Yeah, in this study, we only looked at the community in Hawaii. Yeah. But thank you very much for your comment.
Folks, we're right at 2:30, but our goal is to have a short tea break and then to come back and expand, extend, or intensify hopefully some of these exchanges and engagements. So thank you so much for. I think I've scheduled 15 minutes. We're right on time. 15 minutes for a tea break, and then we're back for a further exchange.